Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I am a comic book artist, writer, creator, self publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you'd like to get bonus live streams twice a month, get access to read my comic books online in a digital archive, get access to a Patreon exclusive Discord server where fellow creators share works in progress, give each other feedback, talk about art, process, tools, and more, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. There are higher tiers where you can get access to higher rewards, but $2 a month gets you in at the basic level. Patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. There's links in the description to this video. If you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Comixology or Kindle, you can head on over to amazon.jeremy.net. That'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It is a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can pick up my most recent project, Morning Star. It is Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains the conclusion to the series, issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter, character sketches, character designs, script excerpts, photo reference, page layouts, and more. You can check out all those at amazon.jeremy.net. And for those books, you can also check out, there are book flip-throughs on the homepage of my YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube or if you're watching on Twitch, you can find on the tab of the tab of the About page, you can head on over on my channel and check out links to all of those things that I mentioned. And speaking of Patreon, I want to give a huge shout out to new Patreon subscriber, Matt Russell. Thank you again for signing up, Matt. Matt's a great guy. He's one of the Crypto Comics crew. It's good to have you on board, and I hope you enjoy. There's definitely check out the Art Book Study Group videos. There's a huge archive on the YouTube the Patreon exclusive channel already. So check those out, and thank you again for your support. So, what are we doing today? Hey, Byron's in the chat. How you doing, man? Thanks for popping in. Good to see you as always. So we're going to continue with more John Byrne, and let's see how this goes today, because I've done 2 pages so far. We're going to do a 3rd page today, and I think even though I set it up for 5 pages to run through, we may wrap this up unless you guys are like, no, I'll finish all 5 pages. So we'll see how you guys feel. John is in the chat. Kingslow Fitness is in the chat. How you doing? He says, what's good? Looking forward to what's going on in the art realm for the day. Good to see you. As always. So yeah, like I said, we're gonna keep going with this John Byrne storytelling, story structure studies that I've been doing. Regroup and turn that off. So let's see here. And basically, we're just going to run through this page, and then depending on how you guys react or anyone else reacts, maybe we'll finish the other 2 pages in this sequence, or we'll just call it a day and I'll move on to some other drawing topics. But first, let me get my pen set up. Let's see here. Oh, that sucks. Johnny says, I'm super tired. I hate my job. I am sorry to hear that. I know a lot of people are going through rough times with work right now, and I'm sorry that you are among them. I need to turn this off. There we go. I am sorry that you are among them, but, you know, try to find things in your life that are positive, that are entertaining, that that are motivating, and hopefully those things will carry you through the rough patch. I'm not saying they'll absolutely carry you through the rough patch, but you got to have something to focus on. Otherwise, you can't just live in misery 24/7. That will just, it's really hard to get through life if that's all you have is the negative stuff to focus on. So all I'm doing is blocking this out into simple panels. And honestly, this is a lot of the times how I'm doing my thumbnails and my layouts for comics when I'm doing my own work, not just when I'm studying someone else's. But it's just a matter of breaking the page down into panels and then figuring out all of the action that's going on inside of those panels. And I noticed that it looks like Byrne is kind of using a technique that I honestly, it's hard to say that my process is so heavily informed by the comic creators of the late 70s, early 80s, the John Byrne, the Walt Simonsons, the Frank Millers, that it's hard for me to say, oh, this is my process. I probably got this from John Byrne subconsciously, but just didn't realize it. And it looks to me that the way that I tend to break down pages is I'll start by breaking it down into tiers, into like either 4 tiers or 3 tiers, the way this one's broken up. And then within those, the panels, I'll usually break them up into like a 9-panel grid. So I'll like have 3 equal panels across. But see how these, it's got one smaller panel and then one larger panel. It looks to me like that larger panel is just the other 2/3. So it's like he broke all this into thirds and then merged these 2/3 into one panel. And then on the bottom tier, it looks to me like it's actually a page that's divided into like 4, that's divided into quarters. And then it looks like he did the same thing here where he combined 3 of those quarters into one, and then you just need a small panel for the other one. My point in pointing this out is that we're looking at the architecture of the entire page, and I find that a simple grid method for breaking down your page, whether it's breaking it down into 9-panel grids or breaking it into quarters or however you're going to do it, I find that breaking the page into simple grids like that is a very simple way to organize your storytelling thought process into how many beats you need. And then when you decide, oh, this beat, I need to have a longer panel, you'll decide, oh, I'm going to combine these. If you need to have a square panel, then you'll combine the panels that have a square shape. If you just need a tall, narrow one, then you'll just use one tall, narrow one. The point is that you can use a grid and then combine it in whatever way you need. If you need one long panel, like maybe someone falling out of the sky, you may start the entire page with one whole panel like this, and then you may just have panels 2, 3, and 4. Like you might just have one long panel and then have the other ones combined because they have the shapes that you need. So you may start with a grid underlying your page, and then you break up the grid and combine panels or separate them depending on what the storytelling needs of that individual panel are. Is it a skinny panel? Is it a wide panel? Do you need a big panel because it's a big establishing shot? That sort of thing. Byron's in the chat. He says, I tend to break down into tears. I too tend to break down into tears. This is supposed to be fun, man. Making comics is supposed to be fun. Let's see here. Let's see here. Yeah, King's Little Fit is giving Johnny some encouragement. Johnny says it's cool. He just hates working 10-hour shifts alone on Sunday. And King's Little Fitness, King's Little Fitness says get pen, pencil, and paper to sketch. And he says he's telling that to himself as well. And Johnny says I would, but but being tired, he doesn't have the energy to stand up. You know, it's funny. Um, I get where you're coming from. For the most part, if I'm really sleepy, doodling is what wakes me up. Just moving my hand, moving the paper, moving the pencil, that gives me some energy and gets me going. So all right, yeah. Kingslow Fitness says, let's do this. Draw out the panels. So we're gonna dive in here. Because otherwise, I'm gonna get too caught up in yakking my jaws like I've been already. I've been yakking my jaws for 10 minutes, ain't but drawing a couple of panel grids. So again, in this page, if we look at the page that I'm doing the studies from, it looks like the horizon line is the ground plane where the tanks are. So all of these figures that are standing next to the tanks and the tanks themselves look like they are above the horizon line. That's my interpretation of this this panel. And I point that out because figuring out your horizon is usually the first step in building a page, for me anyways. Well, no, that's actually not, that's not 100% accurate, because a lot of times I will come on, there we go. Sometimes I'll start by just gesturing the figures in, but given that this has a whole environment to it, this city, it kind of makes sense for me to block in at least the backgrounds of these buildings. And it's interesting because even though the building is going towards a vanishing point, which looks like it's just off screen, that doesn't really help for the buildings in the background, because those seem to be flat. Like, there's perspective on this building that's framing the blob. And I very intentionally use the word framing because the background elements serve to frame what's happening storytelling wise. This building is framing the conflict between Colossus and the blob. Meanwhile, the buildings in the deep background are framing the tanks and the soldiers. True, the tank is breaking out of that frame, but that's part of the narrative overlap of showing depth. It's, you know, it's still working as a frame with an element breaking out of it. So it can serve double duty. It can both frame, but yet give depth cues. Depth cues are when you show what's in front of another by overlap. Like Colossus is obviously in front of this slab of concrete because his knee is overlapping that front part. The blob is obviously behind the concrete because the concrete's in front of him, but you see that his hand is reaching over it. So you're getting depth cues there. You see that the blob is in front of these, in front of both that building and those stairs. So these are all of those places where one object overlaps another. If you haven't heard that term before, keep it in your mind. It's an important compositional cue. Depth cues. There's an important compositional tool. All right. Anyways. So I'm just eyeballing here. I know that the vanishing point is somewhere off to the side here. If I were really doing layouts, I would figure out where that vanishing point is and I would correctly build my page around it. But in this case, that's not even remotely necessary. These are just rough sketches. Some stray ink marks. I will tell you that that's one thing about working digital is you're more likely, well, if you're using an iPad, you're more likely to make stray marks on the page. Whereas when you're working traditional, you're usually a lot more aware of the pressure you're putting on the page and how much ink, if there's any ink on your brushes or your tools that you're using. It just makes you aware of where your mark making is happening. Now, I'm just going to draw basically the silhouette of the buildings in the background. And a lot of this is being covered up by word balloons. So that's another reason to not get too deep into it. But for the most part, what I'm looking to do is just draw, I'm separating the buildings from the sky. That's all I really need to worry about here. Let's see here. See, Martin's in the chat. Hey, 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 hey. How you doing? Hey, hey, hey. Like, not Raj from What's Happening. I forget who the other one. Dwayne from What's Happening. That was a good ass show. Let's see here. Kingslow Fitness says mechanical pencil is my tool at this time. Not sure the fine point, but it's a really fine point. You know, it's funny. I like mechanical pencils too. I actually switched to a 0.7 pencil lead because I found that drawing with a larger tip, it keeps me from getting too detailed. Like it forces me to get large, blocky, to draw with larger, blocky masses. I mean, I can still get a fine point with it if I need to. But I think the thing that I am chasing a lot more these days creatively is that larger, getting the major shapes, the major forms down, whatever is the main part of whether it's a composition, a character pose, whatever it is, I'm trying to get the biggest pieces blocked in. Like for instance, there's a whole massive shape formed by the blob and this piece of building, not piece, this piece of concrete, this piece of road that he's holding up. And I'm trying to sort of, before I go in there and draw the details of the figure, I'm just trying to get this larger shape blocked in. So that larger shape is including the blob, the concrete of the road, and Colossus. I'm trying to get all of them into one big mass. So I've got this slab here that's separating the blob from Colossus. But this slab curves around and actually comes around the front of the blob. Like it almost looks like he's coming up out of the ground the way that he's tearing up the road here. It's also interesting because this is the same power that the Blob's teammate on the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, Avalanche. Avalanche does this power with mutant abilities. I mean, well, they're both using mutant abilities, but Avalanche is like doing like Magneto, where he's making the ground move up and move this way, move that way. Blob just grabs shit and throws it. Let's see here. I see A. Beckles is in the chat, and he says, this is cool. You're studying John Byrne and recreating his panels, thus understanding his creative decisions. Yes, exactly. The idea behind this is, a conversation that I've had with other viewers about learning how to do storytelling. And the same way that you do master studies of artists like, the old masters, the Rembrandts, the Michelangelos. For comics, just doing sketches of just simple boxes and stick figures, it helps understand the decisions. Yeah, I'm analyzing the decisions that John Byrne made. It's not like I'm going to be able to draw something as good as John Byrne, but I can look at the underlying architecture of his decisions, and hopefully it'll improve the decisions that I make in my own storytelling by studying his. So yeah, just a simple box that's tilted so that we can see the top of it, because that top plane is basically Colossus's shoulders. We can see the top and the back, and we would see a little bit of his side plane for the fact that his arm is covering it. But then basically just that box with a little square on top for his head, and then I'm just drawing in his legs as stick figures. Well, not necessarily stick figures, but just wedges. So we've got Colossus being thrown back here. Little pieces of rubble falling around him. And then we've got the blob on this side. And in this stage, this is also when I try to pay attention to proportion. And I try to look like, where's the blob's torso begin and end? So his torso is kind of a little bit above where Colossus's knee is, right in here. Put just a simple, I want to do a box, but the blob is so spherical that if I just use a box to frame his body, you don't get the sense of his mass. And in a thumbnail, the goal is not to, you don't want to get bogged down in details, but you want to convey how a page is supposed to feel. So while I prefer to keep things to just boxes and stick figures, that doesn't mean I won't use a good sphere if it helps tell the story, using rounded forms to help convey the story. In fact, I mean, you could totally do this kind of thumbnail analysis and do it with all circles and ellipses and rounded forms. I just try to stick to boxy because it helps me think in 3 dimensions. But I've also been told by my figure drawing instructor that I definitely draw too boxy. So it can be, this is a personal choice. I don't want to tell you that using boxes is the only way to go. I think that's one of those things that's important to mention when you're talking to artists and you're talking about process, is I always try to emphasize that what works for one artist may not work for another. And these are the tools that I have found to analyze and to work through my creative process. So there were things that if it sounds interesting, try it. But I certainly don't want to tell you, oh, everything you draw at this stage has to be boxes and cubes. Yeah, Kingslow Fitness says the sphere of the blob's belly is the bigger shape. It's like, yeah, definitely. If I were to just draw this in as a big, first off, I still couldn't do it as a perfect box. I'd have to do it as something that's definitely wider at the base, like a 3-dimensional, like a trapezoid. But even that, it does kind of give you the feel of this body. But his mass, his spherical mass, almost feels like the power that the blob has, his superpower of not being able to be moved, and his body being super massive. It almost feels like the spherical nature of his body. I'm going to throw another layer on top of here for diagram shapes. It almost feels like his mass is pushing outward from his body, and that's what's making him so round. It's like his superpower, his body is bulging, like like the forces are emanating from him. And that's just good shape design that John Byrne has going on, you know. I don't know if he's even thinking about that when he's drawing a figure like this. I think it's one of those things where Byrne just instinctively knows to make the figure feel that way. I don't know whether it's a conscious thought or not. One could speculate, but I don't know without, unless reading an interview where he talks about it. Now, not super important, just here in the background, we've got these tanks. You know what? I'm going to switch to a brush. Well, no, I'll leave this. Just keep working with it. Quick thing is that there's a tank, a mass of soldiers, another tank, more soldiers, and a tank that's off the edge of going off the edge of the panel. And what's interesting is color-wise, I think you might have been able to see underneath this tank originally, the one that's in the middle. But when you look at the ones on the either side of it, you can definitely see that there's a small gap where you can see between the treads and look through the tank. And it even kind of shows you how the tank on the far right, again, the work of a master. The tank on the far right, the gap is all the way over on the right side. And the reason for that is because when you're looking at that tank, even though it's way back in the distance, underneath the tank, you've got, let's say that's the underneath of the tank. You're seeing those treads. You're seeing the inside of the underneath of the tread, but then the tread that's on the right side is blocking that. So it's the opening that's underneath it on the ground is all the way over here versus the one that's on the far right, you're looking straight through. So you're seeing directly in between, and that part that's the other tread, the tread on the right, would be off screen. So even in the deep, deep background, there's little details that you would not even necessarily notice. And the reason why I even notice this is because I'm doing this deep dive and I'm digging in and looking closely at John Byrne's work. But all this does is make me appreciate him as a storyteller even more. Because he's using very simple techniques to convey a lot of information. And I think that's, sometimes people just mistake detail for craft. And it's not about being detailed. It's about what does that detail communicate? And John Byrne is very, very smart about what detail he does put in communicates a lot of information at one time. And that is something that I personally don't do. And I'm hoping that these studies, that's the main reason for these studies, is that by looking at what he does, it's not about copying John Byrne's style. It's about learning how to tell better stories by seeing the techniques that he's using. And the most important technique I can say in here is economy of detail, which doesn't mean that he's being cheap on the detail. It means where he puts it, he communicates as much as possible with it. All right, I don't need to draw in the rest of those turrets because that would be me drawing in superfluous detail. I do feel a little bit like I kind of didn't really get or communicate the thrust of what's happening in this front panel here. Well, part of that is that line I drew all the way across the horizon is breaking up that sense of the ground getting pulled up behind Colossus. And to be honest, that the shadow that's behind Colossus, the shadow of his body that's sort of running down here, I feel like that helps convey the ground plane moving beneath him. So it's not a detail. It's not like a shadow that's there for lighting or for composition. It's there for storytelling. Well, yep, composition in the sense that it's giving you more information about what's happening below him. Information that on its own, you might not necessarily get the sense. Like when you look, just kind of glance at this, part of it is that when you actually do all the rendering, it's much easier to tell what's going on. But at this thumbnail stage, I feel like that shadow helps communicate that he's on a plane, he's getting tipped backwards. So motion-wise, what's happening here is, even though we tend to read left to right, the action is that of both this plane and of Colossus getting thrown backwards through the blob and his incredible force here. So this is one of those circumstances where the story, the action, is all happening with Colossus. It's the actions, the Colossus and the blob. But what happens here is that while this action beat happens, it starts with us reading Colossus's thought balloon, and then the dialogue carries us across from Colossus's thought balloon to the blob's dialogue to the caption box to dialogue. First, we get the visual action of the soldiers below. And then below them, we get the dialogue of the act of the soldiers. And the dialogue in here, it says, Major, who are the good guys and who are the bad? Who are the bad? Who do we shoot at? You know? So you go from the soldiers to the actual discussion of what's happening, which is that the soldiers are there. They're there to defend humanity, but they're debating. They don't even know, which side to jump in on. I call this out because this is a particular panel where, even though John Byrne has done a great job of the composition, as always, the word balloon placement is critical to the storytelling. The word balloon placement is what carries you across the top of the panel into the rest of the story. Let's see here. When I was talking about using spheres and cylinders and more organic shapes for this kind of stage, Kingslow Fitness said, I even mixed box and sphere. He said, actually, vice versa. Sphere with 3 main lines to get an angle on it. He says, for details, I had to screenshot and zoom in into tanks for some background details. And hey, Gary Hodges is in the chat. Hey, Gary. Dinosaurs versus Mars Bots is in the house. How you doing, man? Thanks for popping by. I gotta get you on the show sometime. I know, we had that one stream where we were together talking, but sometime I gotta have you on. We can hang out and talk process. Always good to see Gary. Let me zoom in a little bit more. So if you guys want to get a closer look at this page I'm analyzing. So we've got the soldiers here debating about which side to jump into on this conflict between Colossus and the Blob, the X-Men versus the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Again, for those who didn't catch previous live streams, this is a segment from a couple of pages from Days of Futures Past. And I specifically pulled to do story, like composition and story analysis of John Byrne's work. So then we've got the soldiers deciding, it doesn't matter, Sergeant, trash them all. We'll sort out the details later. And then immediately we go to the result of the soldiers firing on them, which is, of course, the one that gets hit is the one who's trying to help the humans, Colossus. Meanwhile, we've got some soldiers with a flamethrower not knowing that Pyro, among the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, is a pyrokinetic, and jumps in and turns their weapons against them, turning the flamethrower weapon into a giant flame monster, now attacking the humans. So let me continue breaking these down. You know, Pyro is one of those characters who I will tell you, I really haven't been reading the X-Men comics closely since like the early 2000s. I read some of the new Jonathan Hickman stuff and I liked it, but I haven't really kept up with them. Pyro is a cool character. And I know they played him as kind of an anti-hero in the X-Men X2 and then X-Men The Last Stand, where he kind of goes with Magneto. I really feel like Pyro is one of those characters that they should make more use of in both the comics and the movies. Like, he's a character that I think could easily be an anti-hero. I think he's also a character who could be if you could just keep him as a villain, he's got an interesting power set. And I think just having another mutant out there who believes in Magneto's cause and believes that humanity is going to try and exterminate mutants. He's not as powerful as Magneto, but he's just another guy out there who's just a true believer and is like, I'm out to protect my people. But I'm sure you could write a whole variety of interesting layers to flesh out his backstory. So he's not just a guy who's a believer, a follower of Magneto. But my greater point is just that he is an interesting character that I feel is underutilized. Maybe I'll pitch Marvel a Pyro miniseries. You know what? I kind of do want to do some Pyro fan art, but I feel like I would need to redesign his costume because I am not a fan of the costume. I mean, all of these guys have the weird shoulder pads. Anyways, again, simple blocks and cylinders for the tank. I've never really looked at the turret. I've never looked closely at the turret of an authentic tank, but this definitely feels like the way that it's angled or wedged feels like it's a science fiction tank versus just the round barrel. Anything that fires projectile weapons, you presume the barrel is going to be round. So, I mean, I don't blame Byrne for that because it looks awesome, but it feels, well, I know that Jack Kirby was an influence on John Byrne. It feels very much like a Kirby tank versus an authentic Abrams tank or whatever type would be rolling through the streets. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that is the fact that I'm noticing that and calling it out is probably more in the fact that comics have had more and more photo reference over the past, say, 20 years. So from the 2000s on, when more and more digital tools were available, more and more reference seemed to. Okay, see, look at this right here. The fact that there's vents on the turret to vent the gas from the shell of the tank being fired. It's attention to little details like that, and that makes you actually want to look at some tanks and see where the vents are when they fire. But even though his tank is kind of a sci-fi feel to it, that he's got these kind of details in there. That's why John Byrne is John Byrne. Let's see here. And Gary says, "I'm down. I'll circle back with you sometime, and we'll figure out a good time to have a chat online in front of everybody." Let's see here. Byron says, "Pyro was one of my favorites as a kid." And Kingsville Fitness is a redesign. Byron says, "It was the 80s. Shoulder pads were a thing." Very, very true. Kingslow Fitness says shoulder pads is like having a suit on, but if you're as big as the Blob, the shoulder pads would be overkill, like how bodybuilders look in suits. Yeah, I don't. The Blob definitely does not need any shoulder pads. I'm trying to think if like because when I think of '80s comics, for some reason Dazzler popped into my mind. Like just the fact that she's a character of disco, which yeah, that's more of a '70s trend. But Dazzler feels to me like one of the most '80s Marvel characters out there. And I'm trying to think if there was a version of her costume that had shoulder pads. Anyway, Soldier in the foreground. Again, trying to keep it just a simple stick figure. Holding his firearm. And this isn't the guy that had the blowtorch, but his weapon almost looks like a blowtorch, or it looks like it's another sci-fi piece of equipment. Again, the modern day interpretation where, and see, that's the interesting thing is, whereas when I look at this, you can feel the influence of like 50s and 60s science fiction in John Byrne's work. Whereas in modern concept design and modern illustration, the tactic of designing characters, weapons, props is, as opposed to making it look sci-fi and fantasy like, modern day concept art would make a weapon look as much like a regular firearm as possible, and then give it like, I don't know, maybe a glowing magazine, or to show that some sort of energy weapon, or there might be like tubes or pipes running around it, or it might just be oversized. So they would give you something that would tell you that it's a science fiction weapon, but the overall structure of the weapon would look as much like an M16 or an AR-15 as possible. And I think that that's sort of a stylistic change between comics that were created in the 70s and 80s versus comics created in the 2000s and now. Bring this brush size down a little bit. I was trying to use the fact that I was using a brush that had some opacity to it, so I could sketch in lightly, but then press hard when I needed to. But I feel like I'm actually getting better results when I choose a brush that's that doesn't have an opacity setting for pressure, and then I just lower the opacity when I want to draw light, and increase the opacity when I want to draw dark. Anyway, I don't need to go into detail. I don't even need. I was about to draw the goggles on this guy. I think that's the problem. Is I'm getting bogged down in minor details. I'm just going to draw the goggles on this guy. All you need is to know that it's a soldier standing in front. This is why it takes me so long to do these studies, because I get bogged down in details that are unnecessary. And I'm mentioning that because my whole point was you don't need to do all of this detail to work these pages out. In fact, yeah, I'm going to go back to the other brush I was using. And the soldier, his head is a little bit lower than that's weird. All right, I guess it is giving me some light opacity. The soldier's head is a little bit lower than it should be, but I'll use stuff like, look at the, I look at the head of this soldier, and I'll use that as saying, okay, this head soldier lines up the blast that is taking out Colossus. Now, in this case, it's not going to line up, because what it does tell me is that the soldier's head should be up here instead of down there, because the blast goes across the panel at about this height. So that is a compositional error on my part. Soldier should be higher. The tank should be higher. But looking at how elements in a page lead the eye around is important to the storytelling, because here's what happens. The blast is what draws your attention. We hear the character talk about, the character responds to dialogue, then we get his next line of dialogue, then we go to the character speaking, and that leads us visually into the next panel. When we see the results of this, it's like we're seeing the blast, and the energy of that blast, it's almost like compositionally it's being carried through this panel and out to the results. This is composition. This is visual storytelling. And it's subtle. It's real subtle. This is the kind of thing where I don't know how many hundreds of pages Byrne had drawn by the time he was drawing Days of Futures Past. But this is the kind of stuff you don't learn by just drawing 1 or 2 pages. You have to draw page after page after page. You're trying to look for interesting ways to move the eye through, to move the narrative through, to work in concert with the dialogue and the balloons. And I might point out that it may be that it was the letterer who knew to how, because you could have probably fit all of the dialogue, because that bottom line, this second piece of dialogue, concussion cannon fire, yes, there's a lot of empty space down here. You probably could have fit all of the dialogue together up here, but it might be the letterer who looked at this and decided, if I move the eye down here first, that's going to move the eye through the panel better than just moving it straight down and out. Because I honestly, when I letter, I try to put all of my lettering together in one batch. Like I try to keep all of my lettering, for the most part, along the top panel of a page. Like I try to treat that like it's a dead zone. And I'm not saying that I would change John Byrne's work, but if I were drawing this page, my normal approach is keep all the dialogue up there. The tank blast, and all of that is happening below the lettering. That's how I tend to design my pages. And I'm seeing now from this that there's another path and there's a reason to break up the dialogue instead of just keeping the dialogue glued to the top panel. It's good to know this, and it's stuff that hopefully I can utilize in my own work going forward. So let's see here. Kingslow Fitness says, I'm hearing Marvel DC watering down on their work. He said, so maybe they're designing with less imagination, more what they already see and copying what they see. Is it just what I heard? Let's see here. He says the overall story, the perspective, like it, various angles, like in film. Yeah, it's definitely good to use different angles. It's challenging when you're, there's the idea of the 180-degree angle, which is you don't want to confuse the reader by taking something that starts off on the right side of the camera or on the right side of the panel, and then the next panel they're on the left side or they're facing the opposite direction. It's confusing to the eye. In this, they're very subtle in terms of like they're showing you one angle in the first panel, then they show you a close-up of that same angle because that's what's going on down here. This is the close-up of one of those tanks. And then when they go back, now we've kind of switched, we've kind of traversed the 180 rule in the fact that we've got energy going this way and now coming in the other direction. But Byrne does such a good job in terms of having the blob, composed. The blob is kind of like the continuity here in terms of he's still in the center now, and as opposed to facing to the left in the first panel, he's leaning towards the right in the second. But it's possible that this could be a little bit confusing. But it's clear enough in terms of what I mentioned before about the energy, the blast of the tank, and then being led to the result of that you go with it as a viewer. It doesn't throw you off that much. But generally speaking, it's something that I would probably I would avoid it, not because John Byrne is wrong. I would avoid it because I don't think I can pull it off as elegantly as he does. Because any rule, any compositional rule, rules are made to be broken. So there's always going to be stuff where you're going to see a creator do something, and you're going to be like, "Wow!" You're going to catch a creator breaking a rule, and you're gonna be like, "Well, how come they get to do that?" Everyone says, "Don't break the 180-degree rule." I'm like, "Well, when you're John Byrne, you can break whatever rule you want." Anyhow, that tirade over. So I'm just blocking in Colossus here. And it's funny, his legs seem really long in proportion to his body in this particular panel. Because if you look at this length, his upper body is tiny in comparison to that. Because, the legs are generally speaking, the crotch, the bottom of the hips are generally kind of the halfway point. The bottom of the pelvis is the halfway point between the upper body and the lower body. If you compare that with this, it does feel like the legs are a little bit long in that panel. A little bit long. Again, the spherical blob. We get this whole mass on the ground. Hell, I think I might be exaggerating Colossus's legs and making them even longer than they need to be. Got his big old head and his fist practically a cube unto itself. And even though it's subtle, having his thigh up gives you that sense that he's ducking. Almost as if they really were aiming at the blob, and the blob just was like, let me just get out of the way here. And I gotta tell you, the blob kind of has sort of a Guy Gardner, like kind of a piggish attitude. I almost feel like a Pyro and the Blob. I don't know. You might look at it, I might be nuts, and no one in the world wants a Pyro and Blob miniseries. I think that depending on who wrote and drew it, I would at least want to check out the first issue. I mean, Deadpool got his own miniseries. I feel like Pyro and the Blob, you know what? At least a one shot. Give Pyro and the Blob a one shot. 48 pages. And I will tell you that I am drawing this much slower than I should be because one of the things when I started doing all this was to try and express how simple it is to work on analyzing your own storytelling, that you don't need to do complicated, detailed shots. I think that I'm drawing slower because I want to make sure that these things are visually clear to you. Because a lot of times when I'm drawing my own thumbnails, they're even more cluttered and unreadable than this. And I figure, even though this is educational for me, I want you guys to at least be able to tell what I'm drawing. And even if I'm drawing simply, I have to draw carefully. Otherwise, no one will know what this is but me. Because like I've said many times, I am a sloppy ass artist. But if you're wondering what my thumbnails look like, this is what they tend to look like. Although actually, I should say that these are, the reason why my thumbnails are sloppier even than this is because the block shapes are probably, the block shapes are more because I'm analyzing and looking at proportion. When I'm doing my own thumbnails, I'm getting more gesture in there. And when I'm drawing more gesturally, the line meanders a lot more. It's a lot more all over the place. It's wobbly. It's shapy, shakier. There's more organic forms in whatever I'm drawing. So again, overlap. There is overlap between this impact of energy from the tank shell hitting Colossus. That energy is overlapping the angel's wings. So you're getting that sense that he's in the background. There's a little swoop of his energy, or that little flight swoop from him coming off panel. I probably drew him a little bit too close to the top of this panel. So let me go back there, throw in those little diagram arrows that I was showing before. Wow, we're already at almost an hour. Well, I'll finish up this panel. And guys, let me know if you want me to finish the rest of the last 2 pages in this series, or whether you've had enough of me analyzing John Byrne's work and I can move on to something else. So we're seeing all of the action that's here, which is Colossus getting pounded, the blob ducking down, Angel, like that guy from Family Guy. He's like, oh no. And then over here. Now, I will tell you that if I were to really sit down and do a deeper analysis, I can probably spot, I mean, I don't see anything directly transitioning this panel over to that panel. And I will say that transitioning to the next panel in a tier, transitions from one panel to the panel, transitions from left to right are always really easy to spot. I think it is actually visually challenging to find a way to naturally, the eye does naturally reset over to the other side. And it feels like we've gone from these 3 panels up at the top are one scene. It is Colossus and Blob, soldiers, Colossus, and Blob, plus Angel. When we go down to this next tier, this feels like if you're watching a TV show and it's a fight scene going on, it feels like it's a cut. If we're talking in filmic language, we've cut now to a different soldier fighting a different threat, Pyro. Now I want to see Blob and Pyro eating barbecue. Got this guy here with this sci-fi blowtorch. There's another soldier down here in the corner behind him. Position the nozzle of the blowtorch up here. Then just one line to kind of give you the arc, like the axis of the blowtorch. So when I say axis, I mean if you're looking at a cylinder, if you were to spin that cylinder, if you had a line running through the center that it would rotate on, that's the axis. And like when you look at three-dimensional cubes, like if you look at something in the 3D program, you know, objects have an x-axis, a y-axis, and a z-axis. Point being is that generally speaking, when I'm looking at things, I will try to find the main, whatever is the main axis. So for a head, if you're looking at it from a profile, that y-axis is kind of the main axis because that's kind of what the head pivots and tilts on. It's what it rotates on. I'm telling you only that because even at a stick figure level, as I'm composing a page, I try to think about things like the axis of a form that I'm drawing, because the axis of this now gives me a basic rectangle to build on. Even though this isn't a cylinder, that basic axis gives me what to build the major shape of a blowtorch on. And you've got the flames coming out. And now back to that, this isn't really a break of the 180 rule. It does feel a little bit disjointed until you realize that this is a close-up of this. But it's interesting because the storytelling is complicated. It feels like the soldiers were trying to attack different people. Like maybe they're trying to attack Colossus or anybody else that's in this fight. And it's almost like they're fighting with people that way. But storytelling-wise, you've got Pyro coming in here, and he is interfering with what they're doing. And it has a very interesting circular logic in that, not circular logic, it has a circular composition in that you've got those soldiers who are going to be the victims of this. You've got Pyro, his dialogue showing what he's doing. You've got him encircling the soldiers. You've got him controlling the flame and turning it into the monster. And then you've got the monster attacking the soldiers. So you can see how it's almost like the composition in a way is kind of a spiral. It's circling in on these soldiers. Very inventive. It's so simple what he's doing, but very, very inventive. And this is why I advise you guys, I highly recommend, if you're looking at trying to improve your storytelling, take one of your favorite comics. Take a book that's a classic. Take a Jack Kirby Fantastic Four. Take like a George Perez Wonder Woman. Take a Kurt Swan Superman. Take those pages and do some compositional studies like this, and look at how they're moving you through the page, because it will improve your own storytelling. I mean, some of the things that the classic artists have done in comics, sometimes they weren't thinking these things out. Sometimes they were working on pure instinct, but their instincts are so great that you can look at what they did by instinct and you can say, all right, they just did that because they're dope and they know what they're doing. I can make a conscious choice to use that as a storytelling technique. It's also possible that there's things, not necessarily in John Byrne's case, but it's also possible that there's things that an artist might have done where their editor or their art director, because back in this era, the art directors knew so much. The editors and the art directors knew so, and I'm not saying that comic book editors, modern day editors, don't know anything about art, but I think that they're more writer driven than they are. Comics are more writer driven than art driven these days. The editors knew so much about art that they could give compositional notes, and their notes are making the art better. They're not just saying, hey, you missed a story beat that we want you to show here. An editor might say, hey, if you move this character to this side, or if you have them framing the person they're fighting in this way, it will improve the comic book. It'll improve the story flow. So that's why I say these kind of things are better to look at with older comics, because you're getting the benefits of the wisdom, not just of those classic 70s and 80s comic book illustrators, but you're getting the benefit of those classic comic book editors. And notice that the background is very minimal here. This is another one of those where, in order to keep the panel from being cluttered, you don't have a full city. You've already got your shot with a full city background in the first panel. Down here, that's all you need. Ground plane, soldiers, pyro, fire monster. And I've mentioned before, this isn't a cheat. This is Byrne choosing not to, he doesn't want anything to distract from that big ass monster. That monster is like, he is the star of this panel. And so you really don't want to draw things in the page that are going to distract. And these guys are like, oh shit, blowtorch was a bad idea. I gotta make this line, I mean, I don't have to, but I'm choosing to make this line more ragged to feel like a flame monster. And my composition, my proportions are a little bit off because there should be a little bit more space between the soldiers and the flame monster, and Pyro should be a little bit farther to the left. He should be pushed a little bit more to the left and down to leave more room compositionally. So I'm acknowledging that that's another thing where I was a little bit off. I will tell you that my proportions are very, very bad. For anybody that has nice things to say about my work, I appreciate it. Proportion is one of those areas where I constantly have to, that's why you hear me harp on it all the time. It's not that I'm beating myself up. It's that I am aware that proportion is one of my biggest weaknesses. And I always need to remind myself to fix my proportions, improve my proportions, check my proportions. So it's not beating up for beating up's sake or trying to get people to say, oh, Jeremy, it's not that bad. No, it's not about that. It's about me trying to keep myself honest about my weaknesses and the things that I need to get better at. And I mean, when you look at this guy, this fire demon, he's taking up like half the panel, more than half really, because his body just goes off of the whole screen, off of the whole panel. And you've got this whole other arm up here, like he's just massive. And even the hand is got like gesture to it. There's one finger that's up in kind of a clawed, like a hook, and then the other claw is coming forward and down. It's almost like he's got like one, like his middle finger is down, and then he's got two fingers going up. And it's a fire creature. Damn, John Byrne. Killing it. So again, as I drew in the previous one, I'm going to go up to this layer. And you've got these guys attacking. And that leads us to the word balloon, which leads us to Pyro, which begins the chain of his hand, encircling the soldiers, taking control of the blowtorch, and the soldiers being trapped, this spiral that I'm talking about. So yeah, guys, Byrne is just, he's amazing. Thank you, King. King Glow Fitness says your breakdown of John's work is fire. He says I'm sketching and listening to keywords you mentioned, like the 180-degree rule. He says I think that the next scene in the next. It says I think I would think the next scene in the next page. I could be wrong. Let's see here. Still learning, of course. He says that XYZ axis you drew. He said the three lines in the box I would use in the circle, combining the two circles are faster to draw, then box it up if that makes sense. Yeah, that totally makes sense. In fact, most people will usually do a sphere with the XYZ axis instead of the box. I just like the box because it helps me define sides. But yeah, a lot of people just go, the circle is quicker. The reason why I don't necessarily start with circles is because giving something a front and a top and a side and making it feel solid is easier to do with a box. Circles can sometimes feel like, because the important thing is that it's not a circle, it's a sphere. So you have to make sure that sphere feels three-dimensional, which means either getting in there and rendering some shadow on it or putting grids on it. Otherwise, a sphere can just feel like a flat disc. Or it might feel like it's an egg, but you're looking at it from a weird angle. Or if that circle isn't particularly, because drawing a proper round circle freehand isn't easy. It may also just be like, well, is that an ellipse? Are we looking at the top of the cylinder? Whereas boxes just are more definitive in terms of the space they take up in space. And I'm not saying that to discourage you from using ellipses. I'm saying that, or to use spheres. I'm not saying that to discourage you. What I'm trying to express is that there's added considerations in terms of making the sphere feel like what you want it to feel like. That's all. It's not a matter of it's a bad way to go. It's actually a better way to go. And my use of boxes is because if I'm drawing quickly and I'm not paying a lot of attention, I won't do it as well. And then my sphere will just look wonky or won't look like the form I want it to. So me using boxes is a way of my compensating for my own personal shortcomings. Just want to make sure that's clear. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying I got problems. All right. So we're going to wrap it up here. Let's see here. And you guys let me know in the comments or in any feedback if you want to see more of this. I think that I'm probably ready to move on to other stuff as opposed to doing continuing with John Byrne studies. Like I said, there's just 2 more pages. If I turn these off, there's just 2 more pages in this scene that I grabbed. You've got what's her face, Mystique turning into Nightcrawler, and then you've got a Nightcrawler versus Nightcrawler fight. So not, again, it's not anything that I have a burning desire to do more studies of. It's always great to study John Byrne, and I always learn a lot. I may do studies on my own and not necessarily even post those, but you guys let me know if you want to see those studies of those last 2 pages. But for today, we are going to call it a wrap. So if you would like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, and these aren't just the normal hour-long live streams. These are 2.5, sometimes 3 hours or longer live streams. Twice a month, we do something called Art Book Study Group. It'll be coming up. I'll have to check the calendar whether we're doing it next week or not, because it's the first and third Tuesdays of each month. And what we do is we dig into some of the best art books around and suck out all the knowledge we can. We're doing studies like the studies we're doing here, but we're doing them from art books. And we've been doing a long-running series on Walt Reed's The Figure, which I think is one of the best books on figure drawing fundamentals out there. Anyway, you get access to that. You get access to read my comic books on a digital archive. You get access to a Patreon-exclusive Discord server where we share artwork, feedback, talk process, tools, tips, joke around, all of that and more. Talk about career stuff, all of that you get at patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. For as little as $2 a month, you can sign up to become a member. And again, Matt Russell, brand new patron, subscribed at the $10 level. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Looking forward to seeing you at Art Book Study Group. I hope you're able to make it. And by the way, for anyone who is interested in joining up, we keep an archive of those previous art book study groups. So there's, I don't know, maybe 100 video, at least 50 to 100 3-hour videos of educational analysis that we've got on there that when you join, you can go and watch all those previous videos right off the jump. You can check all of that out. Newsletter, free digital sketchbook, newsletters delivered right to your inbox once a month. It's blog posts on what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, animated work in progress GIFs. I need to sit down and write this month's newsletter or put it together because that's going to be going out the first of the month. But if you want to check that out and get a free digital sketchbook as a digital download, head on over to newsletter.jeremy.net. Sign up now. Get that. My books. If you'd like to pick up a copy of Eye of the Gods, it's a standalone psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. If you'd like to pick up my most recent comic book project, Morningstar, Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. It's an 8-issue series, told in 2 volumes. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter, character sketches, character designs, thumbnails, page layout, script excerpts, and more. Show you how I use photo reference. You can get all those at amazon.jeremy.net. There's links for all the things I mentioned in the description for this video. If you're watching on Twitch, there's links in the tab for the About page. Thank you so much for watching, for spending time with me. Thank you for the great conversation, feedback. The comments were fire. Love you guys. You guys are so much fun. I appreciate you hanging out with me. That's it for now. Go be creative.